Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, by Daniel Goleman. A summary. This is a summary of Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. Daniel Goleman is a psychologist, science journalist, and a leading author of books on emotional intelligence. He is an emotional development consultant. He participates in developing school programs in America and Canada, including disciplines such as conflict resolution and social skills. For more than 10 years, he wrote articles on psychology for the New York Times and is the winner of several journalistic awards, as well as an award from the Association of American Psychologists for his contribution to the development of science. He was twice nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. Reasons to read. You should understand the importance of emotions, emotional intelligence, and emotional development at all stages of human life. Learn the strengths and weaknesses, and devise ways to develop emotional intelligence in yourself and your children. Start using emotional intelligence effectively in life, both at work and in your personal life. Emotional intelligence and what depends on it. In the preface to the third edition of his book, Daniel Goleman proudly states that he was the one who popularized the term emotional intelligence. Prior to the publication of his book, this term was known only to a limited circle of specialists. Today, some 23 years later, the term has become so common that it is often used not only in the media but also in advertising. The concept of intelligence quotient, IQ, was introduced in the early 20th century, but it became truly trendy in the 1960s, when it spurred the subsequent widespread use of IQ tests. Finally, people could use a simple and clear tool for assessing intelligence. Following its introduction, the test reduced a person's entire set of abilities, skills, and potential to one single figure. What was the result? Recruitment soon became the comparison and analysis of numbers. Employers did not shy away from telling potential candidates that they were only interested in the intellectual abilities of future employees, thus making IQ testing a decisive factor in hiring. However, it soon became clear that the scope of a person's personality could not be reduced to just one figure. High IQ, as it turned out, was not always the key to success. It soon became clear that a less one-sided way of assessing a person's potential was needed. Scientists started talking about the role of emotions as a success factor, not only in people's personal lives but also in their professional lives. As a result, the term emotional intelligence, EI, appeared, which could now address the degree of emotional development of people, their ability to understand their own emotions and the emotions of other people and how they could influence them. This book is about how psychology has evolved towards an understanding of emotional intelligence. The first part of the book is devoted entirely to a detailed explanation of where in the brain emotions originate and what provokes them, as well as how they affect other brain processes. The author explains to us what emotions are and how important it is to learn to recognize them in yourself and others. In the second part of the book, the author explains how to put emotions to good use and how to manage them. The third part of the book is devoted to emotional development. It explains how a person learns to be capable of emotions and why the right environment for emotional development is so important. Daniel Goleman's book was virtually the first source of popular science literature in this area. His book contains significant amounts of scientific evidence available at that time concerning the importance of develop emotional intelligence. Now the book is over 20 years old, but it is still relevant and worth reading in order to gain fundamental knowledge about how emotions affect us in our lives and what we can do with them. Anatomy of emotions. One of the most popular themes in science fiction works often envisages that people will someday become enslaved by artificial intelligence. At first glance, it seems that this is possible. After all, a computer is already smarter than a human and can perform highly technical operations in a fraction of a second, a speed that is unattainable to the human brain. However, everything is not so clear-cut. Scientists have succeeded in proving that almost all people make all their decisions not on an intellectual, but rather on an emotional level. Once in the U.S. state of Louisiana, a terrible tragedy occurred. A railway bridge collapsed under a train, and the cars, filled with passengers, crashed into the river. The parents of wheelchair-bound 11-year-old Anna Chauncey managed to push their daughter out of the sinking car at the last second, as a result of which she escaped. However, they were not so lucky. This act of parental selflessness needs no explanation from a human point of view, but what is it dictated by, if not emotions? After all, the logical question becomes, is the life of one disabled person more valuable than the life of two able-bodied people? However, this topic is not only relevant in the personal realm, but also very much so in the professional sphere. An analysis of the neural connections of the brain and the sequences in which they begin to act shows us that any decision has an emotional tint. But very often, especially when it comes to work, we are not aware of the emotional component and believe that we are acting purely rationally. When we sign a contract with a business partner, we activate the same centers in our brain as if we are choosing a restaurant for our first date. All our lives, albeit unconsciously, we are guided by emotions. That is why it is so important to study them and understand how to manage them. For those who are skeptical, it will be useful for them to conduct the following experiment. Imagine two people, one of whom is completely devoid of emotional intelligence, but at the same time has a very high intelligence quotient, IQ, and a person who has no analytical skills, but who has a feel for others, has a high level of empathy, and is able to establish interpersonal relationships. Which of them will succeed in life? The answer is obvious. A human robot, no matter how highly intelligent it may be, can never become an effective leader or a good partner. But an emotionally gifted person will always be able to establish contact with and organize others, even those who are more intellectually developed, while understanding the feelings of his or her partner. The amygdaloid body, or amygdala, the area of the brain located in the temporal lobe of the hemisphere, is responsible for the emergence of emotions. Humans have two amygdalae, one in each hemisphere. The amygdala is a kind of alert system for the brain, an emergency signal that activates the rest of the brain's reactions. A person deprived of amygdalae completely loses contact with the outside world and can neither feel his own emotions nor perceive the emotions of others. Doctors once attempted to cure a patient's nervous attacks by removing his amygdalae. As a result of the operation, the person, although he did not lose the ability to communicate and interact with people, he completely ceased to be interested in them, did not recognize other friends or relatives, and was absolutely indifferent to their suffering. The brightest manifestations of the function of the amygdalae are those moments in our lives that we later regret the most. A young woman came from out of town to spend her day off with her boyfriend. Over dinner, he gave her a gift that she had long dreamed of receiving. However, immediately afterward, he said that he could not spend the whole day with her, as he had to go to the gym. The girl was so offended and disappointed that she ran out of the restaurant and on the way to her car threw the gift into the trash. A long time after the quarrel had passed and after the girl had completely calmed down, she most regretted not the quarrel itself, but rather that she had thrown away the gift, an impulsive act she was unable to explain. At moments similar to those described above, people begin to be guided by their most primitive impulses. These impulses release physical hormonal responses and activate the cardiovascular system, limb muscles, and instincts. In other words, we turn into our primitive ancestors. Our body prepares to either fight or flee, our sense of smell, hearing, and sight become more acute, and our heart rate accelerates. Why does this happen? In a normal situation, signals from our sense of sight, smell, and touch go to the thalamus, and from there they are transmitted to the cerebral cortex. Only then is the signal sent to the amygdalae, which are responsible for the reaction of our entire organism. In most cases, this is how our brain works. However, in the second half of the 20th century, American scientist Joseph Ledoux made a discovery that turned the notion of how the brain works upside down. It turns out that there is a bundle of neurons that, bypassing the cerebral cortex, leads directly from the thalamus to the amygdalae. This back door is responsible for situations when the amygdalae activate our body before what is happening has time to be fully fixed by the cerebral cortex. That is, emotions and their physical manifestations can be set in motion without any involvement of the conscious, cognitive part of the brain. In prehistoric times, this kind of emotional response from the brain could have been life-saving. Hearing a predator approaching, our ancestor could run away before his brain had time to register what had frightened him. Such emotional surges, as a rule, are remembered much more clearly than emotions born in the usual way. Our brain uses this approach to force us to accumulate useful experience. If we are crossing the road in an unsafe place and we hear the sound of brakes, we quicken our pace and thus avoid the danger of being run over. At the same time, our imagination paints such a vivid picture of what could have happened, and our physical and hormonal reaction is so vivid. We break out in sweat, our heart rate picks up, adrenaline is released. The next time we will be able to recall this vivid experience and be more attentive in such situations. However, an upsurge of emotion, when neurons go directly to the amygdala, bypassing the cerebral cortex, is an atavistic primitive reaction and does not involve analysis. So, while this reaction may save our lives in certain situations, in most cases it will be premature, impulsive, and wrong. A waitress in a restaurant carries 6 trays of dirty dishes at the same time, when suddenly she recognizes one of the visitors as the woman for whom her husband left her. Without having time to think, she drops all the dishes on the floor. However, after a second, she realizes that this is not the same woman. Allowing herself to succumb to this primitive reaction of the amygdala, she finds herself in an unpleasant situation and now faces a fine for breaking dishes and will lose her job. The connection between the cerebral cortex and the amygdala is the basis of our intellectual process. If this connection is broken, we turn into primitive creatures capable of only impulsive reactions, and in that case it no longer matters what our IQ is. In an American school, a study was conducted that showed that boys with high IQs, but impaired connections between the cerebral cortex and the amygdala were impulsive, prone to anxiety and even aggression, because they could not control their emotions. It is no longer a secret to anyone that a high IQ cannot guarantee success in life. Many well-known businessmen, politicians, and scientists in their youth were not considered smart or capable, were poor students, or were completely unable to complete their education. At the same time, many excellent students, who seemed to have great potential in childhood and their youth, did not achieve much of anything beyond school. As we know now, intelligence as such is only part of the equation for success, as it is now believed the role of intelligence in achieving success is about 20%. Of course, this does not mean that the emotional aspect of the equation is a full 80%. We can say, however, that emotional intelligence is just as important as academic intelligence. 5 signs of emotional intelligence. People with developed emotional intelligence are able to, first, understand their own emotions. This is not as easy as it seems. Sometimes people are so deaf to their own emotions that they cannot make sense of them without the help of psychologists and psychotherapists. Second, manage their own emotions, that is, not allow emotions to overcome them or completely block out their ability to analyze. Third, motivate themselves, that is, use their emotions in a productive direction to fight laziness. Fourth, recognize the emotions of other people and respond to them, not just to words. Fifth, manage the emotions of others, that is, build relationships, show social competence. Each of these signs is developed in people to varying degrees, and people can develop all of them. The degree to which someone is emotionally intelligent can only be estimated. Unlike with IQ tests, there are no straightforward methods for accurately assessing EI. One such method for an approximate estimation of a person's EI is to assess how people respond to their own emotions. What personality type do you belong to? People with low EI are overwhelmed by their emotions. They can't do anything about the anger, annoyance, or agitation they're experiencing because they don't understand exactly what they're feeling. People with higher EI accept their emotions. They also do not know how to manage them, but they at least understand what they feel. When it comes to positive emotions, this is not such a bad thing. As a rule, emotions do not need to be controlled. When it comes to negative emotions, acceptance is often not enough for a person to continue to function and interact effectively with others. People with the most developed EI treat their emotions consciously. They tend to have a more positive outlook on life than others because they are able to control their negative emotions. Usually these people are more stable psychologically. Emotions that are usually the most difficult for people to deal with are anger, fear, anxiety, and sadness. Anger is one of the most seductive emotions. It is easy to succumb to because, as a rule, the object of the anger is quite clear. It seems that if you give free rein to anger and lash out at someone, the anger will subside. But that's not likely to be the case. If a person allows emotion to take over, then the anger, as a rule, will not subside, but rather grow in strength. Therefore, it is not recommended that you succumb to your anger. On the contrary, it is better to distract yourself. Try to find an excuse for the person who made you angry, change your line of activity. Go for a walk, go for a run or workout. A Tibetan monk was asked if he knew a good way to suppress his anger. The monk replied, "There is no need to suppress anger, but you should not surrender to it." Anxiety tends to build up. People's sense of anxiety can be heightened further by their awareness of their agitation and by subsequent attempts to compose themselves, which usually leads to a further upsurge in their emotions. Sometimes a person cannot cope with anxiety and must resort to the help of specialists or medication. In some cases, however, various forms of relaxation, as well as healthy skepticism, might provide help. We then must ask ourselves this question: is the bad outcome I am anticipating worth all this agitation? Then act accordingly. Sadness and melancholy can be overcome by shifting your attention away from something, by changing your activity or playing sports. In this state, you should not withdraw into yourself, but rather you need to look for activities that can bring about positive emotions while maintaining contact with other people. The extreme manifestation of sadness is depression, which is a disease that, as a rule, is difficult to climb out of. Therefore, it is very important to monitor your emotional state and not bring yourself to a critical point. How emotional intelligence manifests itself. First, willpower. Apparently, the ability to manage emotions is an innate quality. In other words, some of us are born more equipped to overcome anger, control irritation, and other emotions. The most common name for this ability is willpower. It has been proven that people who use their strong will to control their emotions and are prone to adhere to a more positive worldview and are more successful. The reason for this is that hope for a better outcome and optimism help to strengthen a person's intellect. Optimistically minded students on average pass exams with higher marks, while positively minded employees show better results on the job. Optimism is the best motivator for intelligence. Second, flow. The stage when an optimistic approach toward business and natural intelligence merge and lead to better results is called flow. People who can immerse themselves in the flow are more efficient at what they do. Flow can be considered a combination of the best manifestations of emotional intelligence and intellectual abilities. Third, empathy. One of the highest manifestations of emotional intelligence is empathy. This is the ability of a person to experience and understand the emotional state of others while hoping to change it for the better. Empathy is inherent in all normal people from birth and develops, or does not develop, depending on the person's environment. Lack of empathy is a very serious disorder of emotional development that can lead to many negative consequences, ranging from difficulties in interacting with society to criminal manifestations. Most violent criminals share the inability to understand what their victims feel. Fourth, social intelligence. Society sets the boundaries for how we should show emotions, establishing which manifestations are acceptable and which are not. The three main methods of socially expressing emotions are minimization, that is, the suppression of the external manifestation of emotions; Exaggeration, just the opposite, expressing emotions more vividly than they are actually experienced. This is often used by children and manipulators. Substitution, expression not of the emotion you truly feel, but rather of some replacement emotion, a fake smile and thank you for a gift that you do not like. At the same time, you need to understand that no matter what method you use, people with high emotional intelligence are able to recognize hidden emotions. Moreover, stronger, charismatic personalities tend to impose their emotions, even if unspoken on other, weaker people, infect them with their emotions. The ability to communicate one's emotions to others is also a manifestation of social intelligence. Social intelligence is one of the essential qualities of a leader. Social intelligence manifests itself as the ability to organize, the ability to unite people into groups and coordinate their efforts to achieve a common goal, interact efficiently, the ability to negotiate, prevent conflicts and slash or resolve those that have already broken out, establish personal relationships, the ability to initiate communication and adequately respond to people's feelings, conduct social analysis, understand the feelings and motivations of other people. Fifth, the ability to build personal relationships. Nowhere is emotional intelligence more evident than in personal relationships. In a family, as part of a couple, people are not limited by social conventions like they are at work and can, therefore, be more sincere. In addition, emotions, and not intelligence, play a key role in personal relationships. Unfortunately, the specific nature of traditional upbringing is such that girls are taught from birth to be more sensitive emotionally. Therefore, they come into a relationship or marriage better prepared to play the role of emotional managers. Men, on the other hand, are usually more deaf to changes in their emotional background and are less able to recognize the emotions of their partners. What's more, they don't know how to express their own. There are three main scenarios that can lead to a broken relationship. In response to the criticism of one of the parties, the other is silent. Then the first partner begins to push even more to break through the wall of silence. His or her criticism becomes more and more harsh, causing the second partner to go even deeper into silence. Silence drags on and leads to a complete loss of contact and the inability to sort things out. As a rule, men tend to remain silent. Psychologists attribute this to the fact that men instinctively consider a voice problem more real. By addressing a problem with silence, men seem to deny its very existence. During quarrels, one party always feels like an innocent victim, while the other believes that his or her anger is fair and justified. As a result, the parties become so accustomed to these roles that they lose the ability to see the true cause of a disagreement and understand the other. John Gottman, a psychologist at the University of Washington, conducted an extensive study in which dialogues between spouses were recorded and then carefully analyzed. This analysis made it possible to determine with a probability of more than 90% whether the couple would divorce or not. One of the early warning signs for a couple, according to Gottman's research, is harsh criticism. And the worst factor is when one of the partners moves from criticizing the specific action of the other to criticizing the other's personality. Such criticism leads to a situation where partners feel constantly either in the role of a victim or in the role of a justified accuser. Loss of control. One side is so frightened by the criticism or negative reaction of the other that the first sign of conflict causes the accused to lose control, quickly transitioning from constructive mode to primitive combative mode. This is when the rational part of the brain no longer participates in the conflict and the amygdala immediately take over. Of course, intense emotions are possible in any relationship, but in this situation, one of the parties feels this intensity constantly and, as a result, reacts too emotionally at the slightest pretext. This can mean becoming hysterical, running away, slamming doors, or falling into such a rage that the dialogue becomes impossible. Men in interpersonal relationships are, as a rule, the weaker party. They often hide behind silence and lose control more frequently. They are also more likely to be afraid of a showdown, while women generally believe that such showdowns are a way to overcome conflict rather than start them. What should both men and women do? Men should not be afraid to sort out a problem. It is beneficial to engage in dialogue to maintain a constructive track. It is also better for men not to hurry with practical recommendations. When a woman complains about something, it is often much more important for her to simply get emotional support from her partner than advice and instructions on how to act. It is advisable for women to be more careful in expressing criticism, to focus more on criticizing the specific actions of her partner and not his character or personality. Both should try to maintain a healthy emotional climate in the relationship. After all, maintaining the relationship is usually more important than proving one's point in an argument. 6. Team success. Depending on whether it is high or low, the emotional intelligence of a person in a leadership position can either motivate or demotivate his or her team. In 1978, a plane crashed while approaching the airport in Portland, Oregon. The captain discovered a malfunction, but while he was trying to fix the problem on his own, fuel ran out and the plane crashed. What did the rest of the crew do? They just waited. The commander was known for his heavy, explosive nature, and the crew was so afraid of him that no one dared to open his mouth. The need to interact on an emotional level in business is an idea that many are not yet used to. Often, leaders believe that the emotions of subordinates are not relevant to work, and if the boss starts paying attention to them and taking their feelings into account, he will lose the ability to lead people and make tough decisions. This concept is, of course, wrong. Leadership is not domination. It is the ability to convince people to move together towards a common goal and the ability to motivate them. It is the ability to organize work in such a way so that subordinates do not experience unnecessary stress, which can paralyze productivity. The most obvious manifestation of the emotional intelligence of a leader is his or her ability to give the correct feedback. During a survey conducted among 108 mid-level managers, destructive criticism was named one of the main causes of conflicts at work, even ahead of salary concerns, interpersonal conflicts, and the struggle for upward movement in their career. How should you communicate feedback? Be as specific as possible. If you're not satisfied with some actions of your subordinates, tell them why. General criticism like, "You do not work well," does not bring any results, except the demotivation and demoralization of the team. Suggest solutions. At least indicate a direction for improvement. Give feedback personally, otherwise the employee will be deprived of the opportunity to give an answer, which is always demotivating. Show empathy. Leaders lacking the capacity for empathy tend to criticize subordinates too harshly, depriving them of the desire to improve their performance. 7. Good health. Research shows that emotional stability, the ability to control one's negative emotions, to empathize, and interact effectively with people are some of the most important factors in maintaining strong physical health. Chronic negative emotions have a toxic effect, and making an effort to manage negative emotions, including anger, depression, and despair, is one of the most effective forms of disease prevention. Moreover, as doctors note, most patients benefit when they treat their psychological state the same way as they do their physical state, and monitor both closely. How to develop emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, like any other kind of intelligence, can be developed. Unlike with IQ, there are unfortunately no readily available academic methodologies for increasing EQ. Emotional development starts right from birth. Imagine 2 3-month-old babies. One grows up in a loving family, and when he wakes up in the morning, he begins to cry. His mother hears this and comes to him, takes him in her arms, pulls him to her chest, and lulls him back to sleep. He gets used to the fact that the world is a safe place where there is a reliable adult who responds to his calls for help. Such a child has every chance of growing up cheerful and open. The other child is raised in an orphanage. He wakes up alone. No one responds to his crying, or if someone does, not right away. After all, there are many children in the orphanage who need attention. There is only one nanny. After some time, the child grows silent, but gradually learns to calm himself as best he can. From a very early age, this baby learns that he is on his own. Most likely, he will grow up as an emotionally undeveloped person, will be perhaps withdrawn or distrustful, might experience difficulties in communication, and maybe have bouts of apathy and or aggression. Parents are responsible for the early emotional development of a child. Therefore, it is very important that they themselves be developed emotionally and not make gross errors. The top 3 parenting mistakes that affect emotional intelligence are: parents completely ignore the feelings of their children, treat them with annoyance and neglect, which destroys the emotional closeness between them and their children. Parents give too much freedom to children's feelings, allowing them to express their emotions in any form, which leads to emotional immorality. Children's emotions cause parental anger and judgment, which teaches children to suppress their emotions and literally makes them stop feeling. 2-way parents can develop emotional intelligence in children. Take your children's feelings seriously. Teach children to find adequate ways to express emotions. Unfortunately, the modern educational system does not always pay the necessary attention to emotional development of children, so here parents must play a key role. They must ensure that their child is ready to learn, not only academically, but also emotionally, when he or she enrolls in school and is thrust into a social environment. What qualities are beneficial to develop in a child? Confidence in his or self body abilities. Curiosity, understanding that new knowledge is interesting and beneficial. Perseverance, the desire to act and the ability to defend one's position. Control over oneself, one's behavior and impulses. Sociability, the ability to talk about oneself, listen to others and understand what they say. Interest in people, the desire to exchange thoughts and feelings with others. Cooperation, the ability to find a balance between one's own desires and the desires of others. 3 factors that determine emotional development. The state of our brain, that is, the strength of the connections between the cortex and the amygdala. The stronger this connection, the more stable emotionally and less prone to impulsive behavior a person is. Congenital temperament. There are usually 4 types of temperament: inhibited, uninhibited, optimistic, and melancholic, terminology by Jerome Kagan of Harvard University. The temperament of a child can be changed with directed conscious efforts of adults, for which psychological methods of development exist. It is practically impossible to change the temperament of an adult. The environment in which a person grows up and develops, functional or dysfunctional family, parents or absence thereof, etc. And yet there are examples when adults have successfully continued to develop emotionally. The most striking of them is the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a highly difficult emotional state. Its cause lies precisely in the disruption of the connection between the cerebral cortex and the amygdala. A traumatic event in a person's life breaks this connection, and any, even indirect, reminder of the terrible event leads to the bypassing of the cerebral cortex and an uncontrolled emotional reaction. 3 steps to treat PTSD. Ensure the patient's safety. It is necessary that the affected person be convinced that the trauma that he or she experienced will not be repeated. Victims of attacks are helped by knowing that their attacker is in prison. Talking about these experiences. With the help of a psychotherapist, the patient describes in detail his traumatic experience, preferably remembering as many unpleasant details as possible and describing in detail all his or her emotions. This procedure should be administered very slowly and carefully so as not to provoke an impulsive reaction from the patient. However, such a method brings tangible benefits because when the patient expresses these emotions in words, the he or she rationalizes them, that is, brings them under the control of the cerebral cortex. Sorrow for the person's loss. The patient is helped to realize what exactly he or she has lost from this trauma, and to mourn his or her loss. This process can help the patient at least partially overcome the trauma, come to terms with it, and move on with his or her life. PTSD can follow a person all of his life. But there are also examples of people successfully overcoming the syndrome. Many people who were prisoners of concentration camps, who survived wars, violence, or other severe upheavals, were able to cope with their trauma and begin to rejoice, build relationships, work, and lead a normal life again. Emotional development is possible at any age with consistent effort. Even small changes in this area can bring a person to a qualitatively new level of life, improve his or her psychological state, while also improving family relations and relations with colleagues at work. Being attentive to our own emotions and those of other people, our emotional hygiene, in addition to our physical hygiene, is beneficial and something that we can always do for ourselves.